All right, this is Jerry again from USCamera, and today we are going to finish the installation of the blade housing assembly into the lens barrel of my MC W.Rokkor HG 3528 lens. So that's the stop-down lever that I'm moving it back and forth, and that's the cam ring. What we want to do is have it set to f16, cam rings turned all the way counterclockwise, and the stop-down lever is closed all the way down. Very important that you have the aperture ring set on the lens barrel itself to f16 because that's the settings that we need to have to reassemble it. What I'm going to show you here is the opening that the stop-down pin needs to go through, that opening where I'm pointing with my screwdriver. And where I'm showing you here, that is the tab that needs to couple with the cam ring. And so when things are in the right position, it goes in great. So here we go. We're going to make sure that we drop it carefully in there. It's easy or if you put something underneath the barrel, the aperture barrel assembly, so that it's up high enough to clear the lens barrel itself. And so we're going to set it down there. The pin now is in the opening that I was pointing out, and it just drops right in, just like that. So once we've got it in there, you want to turn it over. And the first thing that we want to do when it's turned over is we need to line up these screws so that we can put a screw in there so that the barrel doesn't move. So generally speaking, I try to set the lens after I get the barrel assembly in there and it's sitting flat, is I want to go set the lens to about f8. When it's set at f8, you can easily move the barrel forward and back and go past f16 or before f16. And so since it's f8, where the aperture stop down will probably be around f8. And so what we're doing here is we're going to move that barrel assembly inside the lens housing until you see one of the holes that hold for a screw to line up. And that's about f8 right there. So you should be able to put your tweezers in that hole and see that it is lined up. So we're going to get a screw right now and drop one of them in there so that the blade housing doesn't move anymore. So now you've got one screw in there, and I put the rear cap back on usually, and then we're going to install the rest of the screws. Now we don't really even snug them up until we get all four of them in there. Now my screwdriver bits are magnetic so that it's easiest to hold the screws when they're magnetic. Or you're going to be using tweezers to hold the screws and put them in place. Remember, we're working on a lens, a piece of photographic equipment, and so you don't have to really tighten these screws down to the point where you may strip the heads. They need to be tight, but I don't use a bonding agent. If you get them tight enough, they will never come loose. So once we get them all in there, we're going to snug all of these up. So now that we've got the blade housing in there and it's secure, we want to make sure that it's working properly. I'm going to put the rear group in first. I try to do finger tight first, and then I'll use a rubber piece to tighten it up. I really try not to use metal tools on lenses like this because it looks like somebody got into them. I'm going to use my rubber piece to tighten up the group. Now we can check the lens to make sure it's working properly. So there we go. It opened up all the way. It stops down to f16. Now if you roll it over and operate the stop down arm, you'll see that the lens stops down and snaps open and close freely. So now we're going to put in the front group. start everything by hand. I don't use any tools on there until I get it started. We'll put it finger tight before we use the rubber tool to really tighten it up. There we go. So use that rubber piece and push down really hard and it'll tighten it up plenty. Now we're going to put the front filter frame back on in the 3 screws. So we're going to put in the 3 screws that hold the frame. Now, since we didn't change anything on the helicoid and we didn't change anything on the groups other than put them in and take them out, the lens should focus exactly the way it did before you took it apart. I will look at the lens groups as I reassemble them to see if they need to be blown off, but just remember that the front coating and rear coating on these lenses is hard. The exposed coating when you pull the groups on the inside is hard also, but the coatings on the elements between the groups is very soft. You do not want to try to clean them. Okay, so now we've got the front filter frame on and we can put the name ring back onto the lens. Once I get it started, I get my rubber lens tool out and I'm going to tighten that up. All right, so now we've got our lens that's been reassembled. It's completely like it was before we took it apart and pulled the blade housing. And one last check you will want to check to make sure the aperture blades are still opening and closing, and with the aperture ring and the stop down arm, and you're ready to go. And thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll have no problem at all reassembling your Rokkor 3528.